Yo, what's up guys? Alfit, and today I'm going to be doing my thoughts on the latest balance change in Alchemy that just got announced, because it does affect quite a few of the decks that I've recently published. There's also a couple of decks that are basically unplayable now because of these changes. One of them I was literally about to post. I was just about to hit the publish button on a deck guide I'd done, built around Racketeer boss, which is, spoiler, one of the cards that got changed. So I'm going to talk about my thoughts on the changes here, and then I've also got two quick deck profiles of decks that I was going to do videos on down the line but are now basically unplayable, just for people who are working on similar decks, just to show you where I ended up on those decks. But anyway, let's get straight into it. So these balance changes are going to be going live tomorrow, and they have finally hit my most beloved card from Alchemy sets, Cabaretti Revels. Thankfully, they've not changed the effect too much, but they have changed it from colourless red and a green to double red and green, which I think is a decent change. The one thing I was really concerned about Cabaretti Revels, or them changing it, was that I think it was definitely way too powerful in Alchemy, but it felt like a good power level in Historic. You know, it was obviously powerful in Historic, but I felt like taking your turn 3 off in a format as fast as Historic to play Cabaretti Revels, you lose a lot of tempo, so you needed your deck to be very built around it. And I think just overall it was a great card for Historic, definitely too powerful in Alchemy, and I think this is a good way of changing it without completely wiping it out of Historic. Now it is a bit annoying, costing red, red, green. For those of you who've built decks of mine in Historic that use Cabaretti Revels, both the Jun's Sacrifice deck and the Goblins deck, I definitely think Cabaretti Revels is still playable in those decks. Just the mana base will probably need to be tweaked slightly to be able to cast red, red, green on turn 3, which might be more difficult in the Goblins deck because you were previously running stuff like Secluded Courtyard, which probably needs to go. But I think Cabaretti Revels is still going to be playable in Historic. You just need to change your mana base slightly. In Alchemy, I think this... to be honest, I've not played enough of the Naya deck to really make an assessment, but I think this might make it too difficult to play in 3-color decks. Now again, obviously I've not tested with it because the patch hasn't gone live yet, but the mana base in Alchemy isn't that great. You obviously have the slow lands, but the pathways being the other main colour fixing in the format, I don't think you're going to be able to cast this on turn 3 consistently in a 3-color deck, which is interesting. I think red-green Cabaretti Revels could be the way to go now if you're going to be building creature-based decks, and there's a lot of good aggressive decks in red-green that you could build. You could just build red-green just generic aggro. There's obviously red-green werewolves as well, so I quite like this in the space it is in Alchemy, where it's still going to be very powerful, but I think you have to be running just red-green to be able to cast this. Again, Historic, it is a little bit annoying. You know, I did see this coming for quite a long time. I was just under the assumption that they would just make it a hard once per turn, which would probably just kill it in Historic, but I quite like that they kept the card as it is and just made it slightly more difficult to cast. Now again, I don't think that change needed to happen for Historic, but I'm glad they went this way rather than the hard once per turn. Then this is the big one. So Racketeer boss, 2 mana 3/2, and it basically gave a creature perpetually whenever you cast this, create a treasure token. That obviously led to a lot of broken combo decks, and now they've just changed it so that once you get the treasure, it loses that perpetual ability, so you can't just cast it over and over again, which I think this is a good change, honestly. As much as I love those combo decks and I've done a lot of work on them, I do think they were probably not great for the format and also kind of miserable to play against as well. And so I think this change is very good, because I think the card is still very powerful in a fair sense, but it just removed all the nonsense with Acerak, Ominous Traveller. Obviously previously you had issues with Grinning Ignus. It'd be interesting to see if they bring Ignus back with this boss change, because I don't think Ignus... I mean, maybe Ignus is good enough with just Bergie in Alchemy, but I'm not really sure. You know, Ignus and Bergie have been around together for a while, and they've only ever really been fringe decks, so I think there's a chance we could see Ignus come back, but you know, again, Ignus is only really a card that's used in degenerate combo decks, so I'm not sure about that. But even though it kind of pains me that this is gone, because I was working on 2 decks for a long time that are now basically unplayable because of this, I think purely from the standpoint of format health, I think this is really good. Now, they didn't hit Diviner of Fates. I was thinking if they did hit Racketeer Boss and Cabaretti Revels that they would probably need to nerf something in Esper, because I haven't played much with the non-combo decks, but from my assessment of the format, it just seems like Esper has just now gone straight back to the best deck in the format. I think Naya Revels was a very powerful deck as well. I think with the mana change, you can't run Cabaretti Revels in that deck anymore, and that deck already had a bad matchup against Esper, so it'll be interesting to see how the format shapes out. I'm kind of disappointed they didn't hit anything in Esper, and my initial thoughts is that's just going to be the best deck now, but I think these changes are nice. Bit annoying for me though, because I just recorded like an almost 2-hour video on a historic Ignus deck that I'm going to do a little profile on next. So this was really bad timing for me, but in terms of the format health, I think this is really solid. Like I said, I've got 2 decks that I was working on that are now unplayable because of these changes. The first one I'm going to show you is a historic Ignus deck. I think historic Ignus had become really popular since there were lists posted that did really well in Best of 1. People started porting them to Best of 3 in the Metagame Challenge, and I think they're really solid. So the first deck I'm going to show you is my take on historic Ignus, which is basically now unplayable because of this Racketeer boss change. And then the second deck that I'm going to show is my evolution of the Trapfinder deck that I posted. So normally, if I make a change to a deck, if I make an update to a deck, I would post a video on it showing you how I changed it. But because the next qualifier was in Alchemy and I'd never qualified before, I wanted to keep my updated list under wraps until after the qualifier, because I've never qualified before. I've got close on day 2, but I've never actually made it, and I thought I had a good chance if I kept that deck a secret. Now with this change, that deck is basically unplayable, so I thought I'd just show you where I ended up going with that deck. So anyway, if you've got any more comments about what you thought about these changes, let me know in the comments below. Oh, the rest of it is all draft. This is the only thing that matters for constructed, by the way. I was looking through all of these like, oh, that's an interesting change, and I didn't realise that they're just for draft, and I barely ever play limited. But if you've got any comments about these changes at all, drop me a comment below, and let's just move on to the 2 decks so you can see them. Okay, so this was the deck that I was literally about to publish the list about just as I saw that the balance change happened. So this is a historic Ignus combo deck that is basically unplayable now because of the Racketeer boss change, which is pretty unfortunate. There's a chance a build of Ignus might still be viable in historic just with Bergie, but I very much doubt that because Bergie Storm has been around in historic for ages and it's never really been good. I mean, it might be worth looking into with Trapfinder because that does reduce both the Ignus and the Bergie by 2, so that might be something I'll look into, but I was really excited about this deck. So before I get into it, I just want to give a quick shout out to Truly Woolly on MTG Arena. They recently I think they're also a viewer of the channel as well, but they recently posted a John's Ignus combo list in historic Best of 1 that they used to get top of the ladder with, and since then I've seen quite a few people trying to adapt that list into Best of 3, and I saw a few people do really well in the Metagame Challenge with it recently. So that piqued my interest. In the past few days I've been testing Ignus in historic and trying to find what I felt was like the best build of it, and this particular build was performing really well. I went 17-3 with it, climbed back into top 5 on the ladder, so I was really excited about this deck. Now it's completely unplayable because of the nerf, but I thought I would cover it anyway, just in case people are interested. So the idea here is we've got Ignus and Racketeer boss. So Ignus obviously is a 2/2 that you can pay 1 to return it to your hand, and then you can recast it with the mana it produces. So basically you can return it to your hand and replay it for 1 mana each loop. But with Racketeer boss, if you give the Grinning Ignus the Racketeer boss buff, it produces a treasure whenever you cast it. So you cast Grinning Ignus, it produces a treasure. You can then sacrifice that treasure to produce a red mana, activate the Grinning Ignus to return it to your hand. So basically you have infinite Grinning Ignus casts and bounce to your hand, which gives you infinite enter the battlefield triggers, infinite casts on your creatures. And then the way you take advantage of that is with Grape Shot. So Grape Shot, 2 mana sorcery, deal 1 damage to any target, and it has Storm. So Storm means whenever you cast a spell, copy it for each spell you cast before it. So the idea here is, say the opponent's at 20 life, we play the Racketeer boss, give the Grinning Ignus the treasure buff, cast Grinning Ignus 20 times, just cast it, bounce it to our hand, cast it again, and then once we've got Storm count up to 20, just cast Grape Shot, it produces 20 copies, and we just one-shot the opponent no matter what life total they're at. And the really sick thing about this particular setup of the combo is it's basically impossible to interact with unless the opponent has discard spells or counter spells. The opponent has no chance to stop this with creature removal because
The treasure ability happens before Ignus enters the battlefield. Once Ignus hits the battlefield, there's no trigger or anything, so you hold priority, and then it returns to your hand as part of the cost, so at no point does the opponent have an opportunity to kill the Ignus. So it's super difficult to interact with this combo, which is why I wanted to focus on this particular setup. The other main card in the deck is Goblin Trapfinder, 1 mana 1/1. When it dies, you seek a creature card with mana value 3 or less. It perpetually gains haste, costs 2 less to cast, and stack it at the beginning of the next end step. So Goblin Trapfinder is really nice because it's such a good way at finding our combo pieces. You know, it's great at digging for Racketeer boss if we have the Ignus, and other way around, it's great to grab the Ignus as well. It does also reduce the cost of Ignus by 2, which is really nice. Now, it doesn't go infinite like Racketeer boss because you still have to pay the red mana each time. But it's really nice at just discounting it so that we can start going off with less mana available. You know, one common way that you can win on turn 3 is by sacking Trapfinder to something like Deadly Dispute or Bargain, hitting a Grinning Ignus that costs 1 mana, and then if we have the Racketeer boss, we can just go Racketeer boss and start looping Grinning Ignus for 1 mana. So this is the core of the deck that I was really impressed with. I want to go over a few other options, because the really interesting thing about this deck in Historic was there was so many different ways that you could build it and strengths and weaknesses to running different cards. So the first card that I want to talk about is Birgi, God of Storytelling. So this is obviously a card that's pretty synonymous with Grinning Ignus. It's basically another way to go infinite without needing Racketeer boss. So 3 mana 3/3, whenever you cast a spell, add red mana. So you get Birgi in play, and then whenever you cast Grinning Ignus, it produces a red mana. Use that red mana to return Grinning Ignus to your hand, and you can just recast it over and over again. The thing is with Birgi is that I wasn't really that impressed with it in Historic. It just felt too slow. You know, a 3 mana 3/3, you take your turn 3 off to play it. And then the other really big drawback of Birgi is that the opponent has a really easy point of interaction, because if they have creature removal, they can just kill the Birgi, and then that just stops the combo straight away. It just stops you going infinite. So Birgi felt quite slow. It gave the combo a point of interaction. And the other thing is, when you're running Birgi, it also dilutes your Trapfinder hits, because you know you instead of running 12 creatures, you're now running an extra 4 instead. So you'll often be left in situations where you have Racketeer boss and then you sack a Trapfinder and get a Birgi, which kind of, you know, is a bit of a waste. Whereas with 12 creatures, you actually have a decent shot of finding the piece that you're missing. The other card, I mean, obviously this was nerfed, but the other card that was commonly run in the Grinning Ignus deck was Cabaretti Revels. If this was being run in a Historic version of the deck, I don't think the mana cost change will be that much, because the mana is pretty good in Historic. If you're running a 3-colour deck, you can probably afford to just run a few more red sources to be able to run this. But the issue I had with Cabaretti Revels was, in this particular deck, since I was focused so much on setting up this particular 3-card combo because it's so hard to interact with, you don't really have many creatures in the deck. You know, we're obviously only running 12 creatures, so if you were running Revels in the deck, you would often end up with hands where you have Revels and just no creatures to trigger it. And the other issue with Revels is you have to be running some other win conditions, because the advantage of running Revels is it gives you a way to win outside of Grape Shot. So if you're comboing off with Grinning Ignus, you could run something like Reckless Fireweaver, which deals infinite damage. I'll just get that up. You could also run Prosperous Innkeeper and Dina as a way to win. But the issue with that is that it also lowers your Trapfinder odds, similar to Birgi. If you're running Fireweaver or Prosperous Innkeeper and Dina, that lowers the Trapfinder odds of hitting what you want. And the other issue is it also can just flip all of your Racketeer bosses into play before you get to apply the buff. So say you just need to cast Grinning Ignus to get some creatures into play to block if you're against an aggro deck or something. It's not too difficult to end up flipping all the Racketeer bosses into play, and then you no longer have a way to go infinite with Ignus anymore. So Cabaretti Revels, very good card, and in some ways it's better than Grape Shot because it's just a generically powerful card in and of its own right. You know, the weakness of Grape Shot is it often just sits in your hand dead as a combo piece until you have Ignus and Racketeer boss alongside it, whereas Cabaretti Revels is a decent card in its own right. I think you're just not running enough creatures for this to be good. And also, I wasn't super keen on running any other creatures because it makes Trapfinder less good, if that makes sense. So the deck building puzzle then is trying to figure out how to have enough ways to sacrifice Trapfinder without adding more creatures, because the main way to sacrifice Trapfinder is creature sacrifice. You know, stuff like Village Rites, for example, is a card that's very commonly run in these sorts of decks. 1 mana instant, sacrifice a creature, draw 2 cards. But like I said with Revels, you're running only 12 creatures, so if you're running Village Rites, you're going to have a lot of hands where you have the Village Rites and you just don't have a creature to sacrifice it. And you do need to have ways to sacrifice Trapfinder, because people are wise to this card now. They know not to attack into it, they're not going to use removal on it. If they do use removal on it, it's going to be exiling it, so you do need to have a way to sacrifice it yourself, so you're not reliant on the opponent killing it. And so this poses a problem because you want to be running Village Rites style effects to sack the Trapfinder, but with 12 creatures it's going to be dead a lot of the time. So the kind of one of the main ways I went about trying to sort that out was by looking at Deadly Dispute. So Deadly Dispute is another card that's commonly run in the Ignus list that I saw. So instead of just sacrificing creatures, it can also sacrifice artifacts. And so, as you can see, the engine that I'm running alongside Ignus here was only called Anvil, and other artifacts to facilitate that. And the really nice thing about that is you can run Deadly Dispute and also Reckoner's Bargain, which is basically just a worse version of Deadly Dispute. But these are really nice because they can be used to sacrifice artifacts or creatures. So you can sacrifice the Trapfinder on turn 2 if you have it. Getting a treasure off Deadly Dispute is obviously much better than life off Bargain, but they both give you extra cards and they both allow you to sack the Trapfinder. But the nice thing that they can sacrifice artifacts means that you can run a lot of artifacts to both enable Anvil, to enable the Deadly Dispute and Bargain, but you don't have to add additional creatures to lower the Trapfinder odds, because, like I said, if you're running Village Rites, you have to increase the creature count, which then lowers the Trapfinder odds. The other really nice thing about Anvil is Wishclaw Talisman, because of all the builds that I tested, Wishclaw Talisman felt really important in all of them. So 2 mana artifact, and enters with 3 wish counters, pay 1, tap it, remove a wish counter, search your library for any card, and then the opponent gets control of the Wishclaw Talisman. So the way this normally works is you activate it once, you get any card from your deck. If the opponent activates it, they can get any card from their deck, and then it goes back to you and you get one more shot at it. But you can sacrifice Wishclaw Talisman with the trigger on the stack, so the opponent never gets control of it, which is really important because there are a lot of decks with counter spells and discard spells and other hate pieces for your combo. So if you use the Wishclaw Talisman to get a combo piece and give it to the opponent, they're likely just going to use it to find, a discard spell, a counter spell, whatever hate piece they're running, and then that can just kind of negate whatever you searched. But when you can sacrifice it before the opponent gets control of it, that's really powerful. That kind of sequence or that play felt really important to me. So the really nice thing about Anvil and Deadly Dispute and Reckoner's Bargain is you have so many ways in the deck to sacrifice the Wishclaw Talisman before the opponent gets control of it. So Anvil might look weird to be running with Ignus, but Anvil and artifacts allow you to run Deadly Dispute and Bargain as ways to trigger your Anvil, make use of your artifacts in the early game, and have a way to sacrifice Trapfinder without adding additional creatures, as well as having ways to sacrifice Talisman before the opponent gets control of it. Then the Anvil itself obviously produces 1/1 tokens whenever you sacrifice an artifact and drains the opponent for 1. So this is really nice at just producing blockers in the early game, which is really important at stabilising against the aggro decks, because typically these sorts of decks are basically just treading water until you get to the combo. So Anvil produced tokens to block on the ground. I also found it really nice against the worst matchups. The worst matchups for this deck were typically discard and counterspell decks, because those are the 2 main ways they have of stopping the combo. And Anvil as an engine is quite difficult for them to interrupt. Once you have an Anvil in play against a Rakdos deck, for example, any of your artifacts is sick top decks. If you draw a Wishclaw Talisman, you can just instantly search for the best card out of your deck and start triggering the Anvil again. You can start drawing cards off the Implement or the Terrarian. Similarly, against Control, you can just start building up an army of 1/1s. I beat Control multiple times just building up an army of 1/1s and attacking them and draining them out. So Anvil works really nice as kind of, it's not great as a plan B as an alternate win condition, but producing tokens is great, and it also just gives the deck a good way to spin its wheels and dig for more cards, because most of the other Ignus lists that I saw were, the key combo pieces and then just a bunch of card draw to find them. Anvil kind of works as card draw because, Implement, Terrarian, Deadly Dispute, Bargain, Wishclaw Talisman are all great ways to keep producing card advantage, but you also produce 1/1s, and you just have this really nice synergy going on where you can just draw a bunch of cards in the early game, you can dig for what you need, and you're also defending yourself really nicely with the Anvil as well. And finally, the last thing that I really like about this particular build of the deck is that you just have a lot more keepable opening hands. My biggest issue with a lot of the Ignus decks that I was testing before was that you had to mulligan a lot to try and dig for your combo, which just makes you super vulnerable to discard spells. Whereas this deck, the range of keepable opening hands are way higher, because you could have a hand that's like Implement of Combustion into Deadly Dispute with one of your combo pieces, and that's a perfectly keepable hand, because Implement of Combustion into Deadly Dispute on turn 2 is just drawing you 3 cards straight away, producing a treasure token. So you have so many ways to dig through the deck while still keeping the potential to combo off on turn 3. Trapfinder has such high consistency when you're only running these. You have good enough ways to sacrifice it without having to add extra creatures to the deck. Got to run Gigantha as the companion as well, and then sideboard is really nice because of Talisman. You have a bunch of one-ofs, so you got Graveyard Hate for the Mirror Match. Underworld Breach was really nice against the discard decks. Back to Nature important against the Enchantress decks. Assassin's Trophy is just generic removal. Byforce for the Affinity decks, and then Fatal Push and Thoughtseize for the creature and control decks as well. So I was really excited about this deck. I thought it was really cool and felt like it had a lot of potential. Obviously with the changes, this deck isn't viable anymore, but I thought it'd be interesting to cover it anyway. See if you guys are interested. Now onto the next deck. So this is the evolution of my Jund Trapfinder combo deck that I posted a while back. So my initial version of the deck was super glass cannon, super all in and focused on doing the combo as efficiently as possible. And I think that was really good at the time because people didn't know about the deck, people hadn't adjusted for it, people didn't really know about it, and so it was able to just do its thing really consistently. A lot has changed in the meta since then. I was going to post an update video on this deck, but I actually wanted to keep this deck a secret because I haven't qualified in a Mythic qualifier. I've got close before, but I've never done it. So I was going to keep this particular list a secret until after the qualifier. Obviously, now that they've made the changes, this deck is basically just unplayable now. So I thought it'd be interesting for those of you who are playing the deck, just for me to go over the changes that I've made since my initial build. So the biggest single change that I've made, or one of the biggest changes I've made, was I cut Dina and Prosperous Innkeeper. So I initially had Dina and Prosperous Innkeeper in the deck as a way to win with Acerak without timing out. So obviously you can win with Acerak by going through the Lost Mine of Pandelver, because you can go through the Dark Pool here and drain the opponent for 1. But if the opponent's at 20 life, that's 80 ventures through the dungeon. If the opponent's at a higher life, you're against a Naya deck with a bunch of life gain, you're going to time out before you ever hit that. So the way I won before was you go through Dungeon of the Mad Mage with Acerak, find Revels, and then you just keep casting Acerak over and over again. You eventually put Prosperous Innkeeper and Dina into play, and then you just drain the opponent out that way. The downside of running Prosperous Innkeeper and Dina is it, similar to the previous deck, it just it just dilutes your Trapfinder odds, so that when Trapfinder dies, you could potentially hit an Innkeeper, you could potentially hit a Dina. So any way to remove those from the deck is really nice, because then it just increases your Trapfinder odds of hitting the Ominous Traveller and hitting the Acerak. So the big change that I've made is replacing both of those with Crackle with Power. So the way I win now with Acerak is, if I have Acerak as a free card to be able to cast, I just go through Dungeon of the Mad Mage until I hit another cost reduction effect. So say, for example, I've hit it off a Goblin Trapfinder and then given it the perpetual ability of Racketeer boss, so now it's free. I will go through Dungeon of the Mad Mage until I hit a Burgie or until I hit another Racketeer boss. Then once I have those applied, I'm now generating a mana, so I'm now producing infinite mana each time, and then I'll keep going through Dungeon of the Mad Mage until I find Crackle with Power. And then Crackle with Power, so it's a sorcery, costs XXX and double red, and it deals 5 times X damage to each of up to X targets. So basically what you need to know about this card is you need 14 mana to produce 20 damage, and it actually scales quite efficiently. If you are against a Naya deck and they've gained a lot of life, it doesn't cost that much extra mana in order to cast this for lethal. So the idea is you just keep casting Acerak, find another cost reducer, start making infinite mana with Acerak, keep going through Dungeon of the Mad Mage, scrying, digging for the Crackle with Power, and then once you have enough mana, you just Crackle with Power and one-shot the opponent with that. And like I said, the really nice thing about that change is you now have the best Trapfinder odds you could hope for, because you're only running the important creatures. Acerak, Burgie, Racketeer boss, Traveller, and Trapfinder are all staples. We're not running any extras, so your odds of hitting a Traveller or an Acerak are as high as they can reasonably be. Now, because I reduced the creature count, I was originally running 4 Village Rites and 4 Deadly Dispute, but even before I made the change of removing Prosperous Innkeeper and Dina, I was running into some awkward opening hands where I had like Ominous Travelers and Aceraks alongside Deadly Disputes and Village Rites. And so the first thing I did before I even removed the Innkeeper and Dina was just to lower the amount of Deadly Disputes and Village Rites in the deck. And then since I've taken out the Innkeeper and Dina and we're running an even lower creature count, we sort of have the same issue that we did with the previous deck, not to the same extent, but where you can't really rely on these Village Rites style effects as much. So I ended up going down to 3 Village Rites, and I've basically just changed the rest of the deck to run cards that work on their own but also give you the option to sacrifice the Trapfinder. So the cards I've added are 4 Shattering Finale and 4 Deadly Brew. So Shattering Finale, 2 mana sorcery, target creature opponent controls perpetually gets -0/-3, and then you can casualty it for 1. So as a 2 mana removal spell, this can just kill any 3 toughness creature, which is really important because it gives you a main deck way of killing Archon of Emeria and Strict Proctor, which are the 2 main problematic creatures. But if you do have a Trapfinder or like a Racketeer boss that you're not using, you can casualty it to either kill 2 creatures that have 3 toughness, or kill a single bigger creature like a Hinata or a Goldspan Dragon or something like that. And the fact that the creature perpetually gets -0/-3 is actually relevant. I've had it come up where I'm against an Esper midrange deck and I've used this against an Archon of Emeria, and then they try and reanimate it with Lae'zel, one of the specializations on Lae'zel, and it immediately dies because of the perpetual ability. So Shattering Finale was just a removal spell that's fine on rate, but also gives you another way to trigger Trapfinder. So the important thing here is it works fine as just when you're casting it normally, but it gives you the option to sacrifice Trapfinder when you don't have it. The other card that's kind of similar to this is Deadly Brew. So this is a 2 mana sorcery. Each player sacrifices a creature or planeswalker. If you sacrifice the permanent this way, you may return another permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. So very similar to Shattering Finale. This can be used as a removal spell even if we have no creatures in play, just to force the opponent to sacrifice their creature or planeswalker that they have in play. But if we do have a Trapfinder, we can just use this to sacrifice the Trapfinder, and we also get back another permanent from the graveyard. Now it is worth noting, I mean, no one's going to be playing this deck now, but when I was playing with it, you do need to note that you can't get back the card you sacrifice. So you can't just sacrifice a Trapfinder and get it back, but you know, say you had an Acerak that had the perpetual ability from Racketeer boss that the opponent had countered or used a discard spell on, you can use Deadly Brew to get it back. So I found these were really nice as main deck removal, which did feel important because some people were main decking Archon. A lot of people were trying to get around this deck by playing aggressive. You know, there are mono red decks trying to go underneath you. So I really like these as interaction in the main deck that also gives you an option to trigger Trapfinder, but you don't have to have a Trapfinder for them to work as well. And then the rest of the deck is, you know, pretty self-explanatory, all the staples here. Mana base wise, one of the big changes that I made was running 3 basics. My initial list was all dual lands, no basics, and there have been a decent number of decks on the ladder fairly recently that were land destruction decks running Cleansing Wildfire and Field of Ruin to try and prey on these greedy mana bases. So I ended up switching to 3 basics, and honestly it felt fine for a while, but these felt important. And then sideboard, I've changed a few cards as well. Feed the Swarm feels really important now. First of all, in the mirror match, as a way to kill the opponent's Revels and Curse of Shaken Faiths, as well as being able to kill Bergi and stuff. Feels very important against the Naya deck at being able to take out all of their creatures and the Cabaretti Revels as well. So Feed the Swarm, very nice at taking out Revels and Curse of Shaken Faith. Culling Ritual, still very important against Sacrifice and also mono red decks where they're also bringing Curse of Shaken Faith. Curse of Shaken Faith obviously here for the mirror, and then Molten Impacts for creature decks as well. So this was a deck that I was doing, you know, I felt like I'd tuned it really, really well, and I was kind of hoping, you know, a week or 2 out before the tournament without any changes, there wouldn't be any changes. But now there have been. I thought I would just quickly share how I'd got to this particular list for those people who were playing Gen Trapfinder as well. Honestly, I'm not really sure what to play. I need to get back into Alchemy and figure out what the best deck is, but this deck in particular, even though it might not have been the funnest to play against, was a really fun deck building puzzle to try and figure out. And even though these decks are basically dead now, I thought it'd be interesting to show you what I'd got up to with them for those of you who were playing the decks previously. But anyway, that's the video. If you've got any comments or questions at all, give me a shout in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next video. Big up!